So, today's video was supposed to be a 2007 retro PC build, but as my luck would have it, the CPU I bought arrived completely dead. So, that gave me the perfect excuse to finally dive into this, the NVIDIA GTX 1650. Now specifically, this is the GDR5 version with 128-bit bus. And because this one actually has a 6-pin power connector unlike some of the other models, it's always been that holy grail for budget office PC upgrades. Also, this card has had a ridiculously long life. It stayed glued to the top of the Steam hardware survey for years, which honestly just proves how many of you out there are still using one of these today. To test it properly, we're pairing it up with a setup that's completely hilariously overkill. An i9-13900K, a Z790 motherboard and 64 gigs of DDR5. The goal is to make sure that if anything bottlenecks, it's strictly the card. So, is this 75-watt trooper still worth its legendary status in 2026? Or is it finally time to let it retire? The first game is Assassin's Creed Black Flag, running at 1440p on high settings with FXAA enabled. Before we jump into the performance numbers, here's a quick look at the GPU we're using today, the NVIDIA GTX 1650. Launched back in April of 2019 as part of NVIDIA's GTX 16 series lineup. It was designed for gamers who wanted a solid 1080p experience without spending RTX level money. The card is based on NVIDIA's Turing architecture, but unlike the RTX lineup, it doesn't support ray tracing. Instead, NVIDIA focused on delivering solid efficiency and value for budget gamers. The 1650 originally launched with 896 CUDA cores and 4GB of VRAM, while later versions, unlike this one, upgraded from GDDR5 to faster GDDR6 memory for improved performance. Now, despite being a budget card from 2019, the 1650 went on to become one of the most widely used GPUs amongst PC gamers, especially during the COVID GPU shortages, when finding a graphics card at MSRP was harder than finding toilet paper. In Assassin's Creed Black Flag at 1440p, the 1650 actually holds up surprisingly well. Gameplay feels smooth, but overall though, it's still very playable, with the card delivering an average of 53 FPS, a 1% low of 42 FPS, and a 0.1% low of 23 FPS. Next up is Battlefield 6, running at 1080p on low settings with motion blur turned off and AMD FSR set to quality. So, even in 2026, the 1650 is still surprisingly capable. Alongside gaming, it's also a great choice for a home media server, like Plex or Jellyfin, thanks to its excellent video encoding support.
Do you want to call?
Alexa, fuck off. With support for H.264 and H.265 transcoding, it can handle video conversion on the fly quickly and efficiently without putting too much strain on the rest of your system. This is a huge plus if you're building a budget media server, because you can stream movies to your phone, tablet, smart TV and another PC without any of those annoying buffering issues. And the best part, if you've already got an old 1650 sitting in a drawer, then it will most certainly do, because it's cheap and very affordable. Now, let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more videos about servers. I've had some experience over the years, especially using TrueNAS. Now, in Battlefield 6, performance averages 40 FPS, with 1% lows of 31 FPS and 29 FPS for the 0.1% lows. Next up is Crimson Desert at 1080p on low settings with AMD FSR set to performance. Now, one of the best uses for this 1650 in 2026 is upgrading older office PCs into affordable gaming machines. A lot of the GTX 1650 models don't even require external power connectors, which makes them ideal for older systems with weaker power supplies. They're also compact, power efficient and run fairly cool and quiet. They fit easily into small OEM desktops. For many people, it's still one of the cheapest and simplest ways to bring new life to an old PC. It's obviously not high-end, but for budget builds or repurposed office PCs, the 1650 still makes a lot of sense. Now, this game is really pushing the GTX 1650 hard, averaging 42 FPS with 1% lows of 21 FPS and a 0.1% low of 7 FPS. Next up is Fallout 4 at 1080p on high settings with depth of field set to bokeh and FXAA enabled. The GTX 1650 is also a really good option for a living room gaming setup, or a budget Steam machine because of its low power consumption and compact size. It fits perfectly into a small PC connected to a TV, and it's powerful enough to handle operating systems like SteamOS or Bazzite, giving you a nice console-style PC experience without spending an absolute fortune. It's also great for remote game streaming through apps like Moonlight, so you can stream games smoothly from a more powerful PC, straight to your living room setup. And on top of that, the 1650 works well for emulation. Now, in Fallout 4, the system averages 48 FPS, with a 1% low of 36 and a 0.1% low of 25 FPS. Next up is Fortnite at 1080p using low settings with motion blur disabled and FXAA enabled. Now, if you're using the GTX 1650 and your main focus is esports and competitive gaming rather than AAA titles, while it's definitely an entry-level GPU by today's standards, it still holds more than enough power for the games most competitive players actually spend their time on. So, the GTX 1650 can actually push high frame rates at 1080p, even without aggressive upscaling. That makes it a really good pairing for 144Hz monitors. Even in more demanding games, like Counter-Strike 2, the card still holds up pretty well. You'll definitely need to lower some of the settings to maintain a decent frame rate, but with properly tuned settings, the experience can be still playable at 1080p. Now, in Fortnite, the 1650 averages 158 FPS, with 1% lows of 95 and the 0.1% lows at 55 FPS. Next up is Resident Evil Requiem at 1080p resolution on medium settings with depth of field and motion blur turned off, and AMD FSR 3.1 set to balanced. Now, because this is a GTX card and not part of NVIDIA's RTX lineup, the GTX 1650 doesn't support DLSS since it lacks the tensor cores needed, and also ray tracing support is non-existent too, as the card doesn't have the dedicated RT cores required for ray tracing features. So, this really isn't the kind of GPU you'd buy for the best visuals. But with that said, there are still a few ways to squeeze extra performance out of the card. AMD FSR, for example, works perfectly fine on the 1650. Some games support Intel XeSS, and tools like lossless scaling on Steam can also help smooth things out in supported titles, of course. Now, in Resident Evil Requiem with upscaling, the GTX 1650 averages 38 FPS, with both of the respected lows at 35 FPS. And finally, we have The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, running at 1080p on high settings with depth of field and motion blur turned off. Performance here is pretty solid overall, averaging 53 FPS, with a 1% low of 42 FPS and a 0.1% low of 37 FPS. So, after testing the 1650 across a wide range of games in 2026, I honestly think this card still deserves the reputation it's built over the years. It's obviously not a high-end GPU, and modern AAA games are definitely pushing it to its limits. But what really makes the GTX 1650 so impressive is just how versatile it actually still is, even this many years later. The GTX 1650 still has a place in 2026. Its low power consumption and the fact that many models don't even require external power make it incredibly easy to drop into older systems. If you already own a GTX 1650 or you can grab one cheap on the used market, it's still a perfectly capable card for budget gaming and general PC use. Would I actually recommend buying one brand new? Probably not. There are newer GPUs that offer better performance. Anyway, that just about wraps up today's video. Let me know in the comments if you're still using a GTX 1650 and what games you're playing on it in 2026. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more retro tech. I'm David James, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.